So I was at the grocery store, Caputo's, the other day, and I was over by the deli, and there's this, and I was looking at my car, wasn't paying attention. There's this lady there, and she wasn't moving, and I thought, who is this lady? And who's in my way? And I looked up, and it was my sister-in-law and my niece, and they were laughing, and like I was talking to them, and I asked my niece, Gianna, so how you doing? She goes, I'm really nervous. She goes, I'm nervous. I said, well, what are you nervous about? She goes, well, I'm starting school. And I said, yeah, that's right. She's starting high school and a new school, and she doesn't know anybody, and so she's talking about all these things. And so here's this young lady, and like this is in her mind. The first thing she brought up, that's what she's thinking about. That's what's on her mind all the time, right now, is starting school. A new school, doesn't know anybody. And, it might not seem like a lot to us, but that's her world right now. That's what she's facing, and it's a big deal. It's a big deal. So I want you to, just for a second, I want you to think about what that is for you. What is your big deal? Might not seem like a lot to anybody else, but in your life right now, what is the thing? Right? Just take a second, close your eyes, put your head down, and put that in your head. All right? Put it right there. I'll do the same thing. All right? Okay, it's right there. It's in your head. That's the most important thing in your life right now that you're worried about, that's scaring you. It's a family issue. It's a health issue. A relationship. School. It's a boyfriend or girlfriend. It's you're in trouble about something. Whatever. That's your world right now. Okay. Now, before we dive into that, let me just look at one of my favorite readings in Kings, which was our first reading. They just give you a little snippet today of Elijah and the cave and the noise and the silence. But to get that, I just, bear with me, I'm just going to expand it on both ends. Before Elijah gets to the cave, what happened to him? We all know this story. It would have made a great movie, all right? Mel Gibson would have had a field day with it, all right? That it's Elijah who has been sent by God to Israel because Israel is just going crazy. The whole culture's nasty. The political leadership is an absolute disaster. Right? Not that that ever happens except in the Bible, okay? So here he is. You've got King Ahaz and his despicable wife, Jezebel, who's a Baal worshiper, a pagan worshiper, a child sacrifice person. That's what they did. The Baal worshipers sacrificed babies. They killed them. And Ahaz, who's a king of Israel, falls into that same bad worship. So he and his wife are just laying waste to the religious, social, political fabric of the nation. So, and the people are following that. They're becoming Baal worshipers and doing those same despicable things. So Elijah's into that, and he's preaching, and they're not listening. And so he has this contest. Remember the contest where the 450 cult prophets of the god Baal are set up against Elijah. Elijah says, whoever is able to call upon God and have God intercede and intervene in this moment is the winner of this contest. And so they go up onto the mountain, and they build an altar at Elijah's instruction. You got the 450 cult Baal guys, and you got Elijah, and you got all the people who are just like, this is going to be great. And so they build the altar to Elijah's instruction, and they put the wood on it, and then they put the animal on it, and then they just pour water all over it. And Elijah says, you guys go first. And they start hooping and hollering and dancing and screaming and calling to their God, to the god Baal, to come down and consume the sacrifice. And nothing's happening. And then then Elijah says, well, maybe if you spoke louder, he would hear you. And nothing happens. And he says, well, maybe Baal is on the privy, and so he's indisposed at the present moment. And so maybe just speak louder. And so they shout louder, and they start cutting themselves, and this ecstatic moment for them, and nothing's happening. And it says no one was listening, and no one was there. Okay, so Elijah says, all right, you guys have had your turns. By the end of the day now, they've been at it all day. And Elijah says, more water, and fills the trench, and he just gets up and he says, Lord, you are God. We give you praise. You are the only God. You are Yahweh. And I'm zealous, O Yahweh, for you. And all of a sudden, this thunderbolt, and everything just comes down, this fire from heaven, and just blasts the altar, blasts the sacrifice, laps up the water. It's just gone. And the people are like, oh, the Lord is God. The Lord is God. The Lord is God. It's fantastic. Well, Elijah thinks, oh, I've won. And so he takes the 450 cult prophets down to the brook Kidron, and he slashes their throats all at once. It's over. And he said, I've got Israel back. Well, no. The people were like, well, that was fun. But they go back to their life. And Ahaz and Jezebel, far from converting, are so angry that they seek to assassinate him. So with no choice, he has to leave. And he takes off into the desert and hides. And he's exhausted. And he's emotionally and physically drained. You know how when we're fearful, and it just zaps us. That's how he's at his wit's end. He crawls under a broom tree. He says, Lord, take me. I'm dead. I want to die. And so the angel comes and feeds him and sustains him. And then he sleeps, and the angel wakes him up and says, no, eat some more, eat because you got to go. You got to get to Mount Horeb. God's got a message for you. So he does, and he gets to Mount Horeb after all this long journey. And he climbs the mountain, and he's just so scared, and he's just finished. He crawls into a cave and he hides. All right, this is where the story picks up. And he hides, and God says, hey, what are you doing in there? Get out. Come to the mouth of the cave. And he says, he's like standing there, and he hears this great earthquake. Rocks shattering, nothing. He goes, God's not there. Here's the great wind, nothing. God's not there. Great fire, nothing. God's not there. And then, what does he hear? Nothing. Sheer silence. The still, small voice, the whisper. In that whisper, he hears God speaking to him. And he hides his face in his cloak. All right. Now, what happens next? That's the next part of the story. Okay. What happens next is this. God says to Elijah, who is now present to Elijah, not in the earthquake, fire, or the wind, but in the whisper. Elijah, in the silence that he has brought to himself, can now hear God. And God says this, Elijah, what are you doing here? What are you doing? And Elijah says, Lord, I am zealous for your house, O Yahweh. But they've torn down your altars, and they're killing your priests, and now they're after me. He's had it. He's whining. He's complaining. And in the whisper, God says, Elijah, knock it off. I'm with you. Now, why are you here? And Elijah, feeling God's presence in the silence that he has allowed to come to his heart, is reinvigorated, reconvicted, and he says, yes, I am zealous for your house, O Yahweh. Yes, they are tearing down your altars, they are killing your priests, and they're after me. Now, let's go get them. And God says, exactly. You go down the mountain, and you get your successor who's going to help you, and get back to work. All right. So, that's the story. It's better that way, isn't it? You get the whole thing. Now, what are the earthquakes? What are the storms? What are the fires? What are the destructive winds that sweep across the horizon of our life and invade us and cause us to lose our nerve and make us just want to crawl under the broom tree and say, Lord, I've had it. I'm done. What are the things that scare you, that wake you up at 3 in the morning? What are the moments that you're consumed by? What is your, I'm starting high school and I don't know anybody? What is that? Come out of the cave where you're hiding and stand there and listen. And it isn't going to be in God coming to you in an earthquake or a fire or a storm or a mighty wind. It is, for once in your life, shut up and be quiet. Stop talking. Get off your cell phone. Turn off the TV. Create in your heart and in your home a place of silence where you can actually hear God speak to you. Stop complaining. Oh, Lord, I always ask for these things, but you never do them for me. I've got all this stuff going on in my life, and you're not here for me. Yes, He is. You're not listening. We don't listen. We don't create a space of silence to hear the still, small voice of God speaking to us. He is there all the time. We are not there with Him. That's the problem. It's not God's fault, it's ours. Do you have a place in your house where you pray? Do you eat dinner together as a family? Do you have your social media and your computers turned off? Are there moments of the day where the kids are not playing video games? Are they always busy doing something? Or you've created a place in your lives where silence and peace and mercy and the rest of God can be experienced. Are we doing that? If you are, then you can hear what the Lord is saying and you can act on it. How does that work? Okay, the gospel, real quick, because I know I can get crazy. But the gospel, here's Jesus. They've just multiplied the 5,000 loaves, or fed the 5,000. And He showed His mastery over the elements. Now He's going to show His mastery over nature, because He's God. And He goes up on the mountain and He prays, because Jesus needs to pray. He needs to be in communion with His Father. You think anybody had stuff to be worried about or scared about? It was Him. And yet, was He scared? Was He afraid? His human nature, yes. But He understood that God all the time had his back. His Father was taking care of Him, and He lived off that love. That's why He prayed. And from that place of prayer, He's interceding for His disciples, who He has sent out on the boat onto the sea where the storms are raging. And He's praying for them. Jesus is always praying for us. He's always praying for the boat, which is the church, and He's praying for everybody who's inside of it. He's praying for us. And sometimes He intervenes. He comes down the mountain and He comes to us through the storms and the earthquakes and the fires of our life, and He shows Himself to us. Imagine the noise of that moment on the sea and the disciples and their fear as the primordial ex nihilo formlessness and void is swirling and erupting beneath their boat. They're terrified. And they see Jesus, and they're terrified. That's God. That's God. Anytime we see God, we're terrified. What's He going to do with my life? And he comes, and then Jesus coming over the water. And this terrible vision is a reminiscence of Genesis, when the Spirit flowed, the Spirit carried the Word over the water to bring about creation. The Spirit is bringing Jesus to the disciples over the water to bring about a new creation in their hearts, a deepening of faith and trust in their lives. And Peter, who's the head, gets it first. He says, Lord, if it is you, bid me to come. And the Lord says, come. He's always going to tell us to do that. He's never not going to tell us to come to him as he comes to us. Peter jumps out and he walks on the water. He's looking at Jesus. And as soon as he notices the storm and the fires of life, as soon as he notices the chaos and the worries and the anxieties, as soon as he lets all that noise invade his heart, his eyes are no longer on Christ. They're on himself and what he's going to do about his stuff, how he's going to fix the problem, how he's going to be the answer to everything, it's all about him. And he starts to sink, because that's what always happens when we take control. Keep your eyes on him all the time. Through every problem, through every anxiety, worry, fear, storm, fire, earthquake, everything that besets us, keep your eyes on him. Lord, save me, as Peter starts to sink. Immediately, the word is, he reaches out and saves him, and they get back into the boat. Stay in the boat. Stay with Christ. Keep your eyes fixed on him. Create a place of silence where you can hear him speak to you, where you can hear him sustaining you in all these trials. Keep your eyes fixed on him. How often in our days do we partly give him a passing glance when he wants our eyes always on him through every moment? It is not impossible in the spiritual life to train yourself through everything that you're doing to keep all those things seen through Christ. Look at him. And everything you're doing, look at him and all those things through him. Amen? Do it. Here's the thing. Why do we pray the way we do? All right? You do stuff like this. All right, we pray. This is like a prayer thing, huh? Whether you're sitting or at your bedside or you're kneeling in the pew. We as Christians would say, all right, this is pretty much how people pray, one way or the other. What's going on here? Why are we doing that? Well, think of it this way. All right? I'm bowing my head, so I'm submitting my mind to God. I am closing my eyes, and I am seeing with the eyes of my heart. I am shutting my mouth. For once in my life, I am not talking. So I'm shutting my mouth, and now I'm listening. I am bowing my head, closing my mouth, closing my eyes, listening. Lord, speak to me. I'm like this because what did the disciples do when they got back in the boat? They worship. I'm worshiping because all the answers are from him. And I'm kneeling, which means I'm not acting. I'm not running. I'm not fixing. I'm not doing. I'm not telling. I'm not doing anything but letting the Lord have my life. So, back to that thing that you thought about. What was that? All right, now. What Jesus is telling us today, does that help you? Does that give you a clue as to how whatever that is in his hands, in his love, in his care, and that he's got you? Say to him now in your heart, Lord, bid me to come to you. Step off. Step off into the deep and walk on water.